Ooh, it is time. I am very excited to talk about my progeny. Hello, interwebs! I am extremely excited because it is time for me to do my full review of the entire first season of the fantastic and excellent Star Trek Prodigy. I'm really pumped to talk about the show and just sort of like look at it from a top-down perspective instead of individual episodes, because truly and honestly, this was an absolute treasure and treat for the Star Trek franchise. And I really think that if you have not watched Star Trek Prodigy as a Star Trek fan, you have missed out on something special, because this show was truly excellent on numerous different levels. You know, it's kind of become like a joke within Star Trek fandom that the first seasons of every Star Trek show kind of sucks besides the original series, and that mostly held true for the most part, even up until mostly just this year. But this year, between Lower Decks, well, technically it was last year for Lower Decks, or even the year before, time is a flat circle, but Strange New Worlds and Prodigy, I think all three of those shows have shown that like first seasons of Star Trek shows can come out swinging and really prove that these are excellent series right off the bat. And Prodigy, I think it earns that place. So let's dive into what makes this show works and why I think it is a truly excellent addition to the Star Trek canon, and one that I think every Trekkie, not just kids, but every Trekkie should watch. And actually, let's start there with the fact that this was a Star Trek show ostensibly aimed at kids, because this is the first time since arguably the animated series way back in the 70s that Star Trek has had a entry that was like targeted directly at kids. And while Star Trek has always been a franchise that has been family friendly for the most part and wanted everyone in the family to watch it, in fact a lot of kids got into Star Trek from the original series reruns back in the 70s in the animated show as well. This is the first one that's like aimed directly at kids, and I think a lot of people took that to think that, oh, well then this isn't a Star Trek show for me. This isn't a Star Trek show that's going to have anything for me, Mr. Adult Man. And that's not to knock anyone who has that point of view, but I think it is people not recognizing how much children's animation has come forward in the past few years to be I think some of the best TV shows out there nowadays, like She-Ra, Dead End Paranormal Park, Avatar The Last Airbender, even if you're going to go back even further, numerous other shows that I could just list off, Kipo and the Age of the Wonder Beasts, just fantastic series that are aimed at kids, but I think somehow tell some of the deepest like world building, great stories, best written characters, and yes, sometimes painting with a broad emotional brush because it is for kids and it's sort of teaching kids how to handle emotions and sort of guide them through some complicated situations with a depth that they haven't really dealt with as kids before. But I think that it still allows those shows to be very nuanced within that structure, and Star Trek Prodigy is certainly no different. This show comes off the back of the Hageman Brothers show Troll Hunters, which is the sort of Netflix series that had like 3 series and a movie that was, except for the final 5 minutes of that movie, and sorry Hageman Brothers if you happen to be watching this, I love Troll Hunters. And I hate to be in the consensus of I hate those final 5 minutes, but I do. But otherwise, Troll Hunters was another great show that showcased like these writers' ability to tell really long, elaborate stories that mix in a bunch of lore and a bunch of different characters and make it feel really cohesive and really heartfelt. And so to bring that to a Star Trek show, I think was really excellent, and you can see that throughout all of this. So many of the characters in the show, from Dal to Gwen to Zero to Rock Talk, my dear God, my baby Rock Talk, I love Rock Talk so much. Just have so much depth to their characters. Every single one of these characters, kind of fitting with Voyager, which this Prodigy is sort of a spiritual successor of. They're all sort of misfit characters sort of shoved together on this protostar ship that you initially think they're all one thing. But as we get to learn them, you get to deconstruct a lot of their insecurities and who they are, and they become more than just their initial appearances. I think that's most obvious with the character of Rock Talk, who's this rock monster. You would think would be like tough and strong and be the security officer of the show, and that's the role she's put into initially. But then as you get to know her, you see she's actually soft, sensitive, and actually wants to be interested in science and grow as like a person just interested in that. And I loved that sort of twisting of her character from initial appearances. But everyone has that. Gwen is initially seen as this like, she's the daughter of the main villain of the show, the Diviner, and so she initially seems like she's going to be the kind of jerk enemy, but then ultimately becomes someone who is their strongest ally because she sort of has this feeling like she isn't loved by her father, but gets loved by the community created on the protostar. Dal seems like this like out for himself, individualistic guy, but eventually learns to be a leader and pull everyone together after he sort of deals with his insecurities around his own origin and where he comes from. Every character has that. Zero is afraid of their appearance, which I thought was great storyline for a non-binary character to have, where you a Medusan from the original series, but then the fact that they're afraid to show who they are is very resonant as a non-binary person, but also I think fits Star Trek lore in a really cool way. And I thought all of that was just brilliant. And then also you got my favorite little Murph. I have my little Murph doll hiding back here. Got a little blob Murph. Isn't he adorable? So Murph is absolutely wonderful. And speaking of Zero, one thing that normally I would knock a show for, but here I actually think it works to its show's benefit, is its LGBTQ representation. And the reason I say knock is that one problem that I continually have with science fiction in general, and Star Trek specifically, but it's problems with other shows like The Orville kind of had this issue in its first couple seasons, is that when many pop culture shows try to depict LGBTQ characters, they end up relegating LGBTQ characters to being like the alien metaphor. And that's very much present here with the character of Zero. We have a non-binary character who is a gaseous alien cloud. And so, of course, the gaseous alien cloud is going to be the non-binary one, instead of there actually being like a non-binary human character within the show to represent that non-binary people can exist as human beings. And it tends to make LGBTQ people seen as different or other. But here within Prodigy, that actually works as a strength, because outside of Janeway, technically, and even then she's mostly a hologram for the show, for most of the show, all of the characters are aliens. And so it's all about relating human feelings to completely alien cultures and characters. So in a weird way, you know, if this show was more centered on human characters and had more human characters in it than just like the few Starfleet characters we get on the side, I would have a bigger issue with this and say, like, you should have a non-binary character present within the show, not just a gaseous cloud, even though I relate very much to gaseous clouds because I am one. But here I think it actually absolutely is a strength. And it also fits within the larger context of Star Trek as a franchise that I think has been the best science fiction franchise when it comes to LGBTQ representation. Between Discovery and Picard and Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks, we have so many queer and trans characters out there in Star Trek that I'm honestly like, I'm here for the non-binary gaseous cloud, because you have a non-binary character that exists within Star Trek Discovery and a non-binary character that guest starred in Star Trek Strange New Worlds. So like the very fact that there's such a plethora of representation within this franchise allows me to sort of like be like, if this is the one non-binary character that we got and it was like relegated to the kids show and then gaseous cloud character, not to dismiss it as kids shows, but the one that gets the least platform. Certainly, I'm sure this show beyond maybe Lower Decks is one of the lower viewed Star Trek shows. No offense at it, because this quality is higher than some of the ones that get the best views. But normally that would be a knock for me. But within the context of the franchise, within the context of the show, I actually think it works really well. So yeah, no, way to take something that I normally take as a criticism of LGBTQ representation and make it a strength. And it makes it just a strength, and it articulates just the strength of the whole show about the show itself is about us as humans relating to alien characters and cultures, which is the show itself is about people using diversity and difference to come together. So just a great conversation between what the show is doing and what the show is about. And I think that worked really, really well, especially just within the character of Zero and something that I care about, which is non-binary and LGBTQ generally representation. So all those characters, fantastic. Jane Pop also great as well. But moving on beyond just the fact that these are really well-written characters, the thing that I loved this show most for was that while it is a Star Trek show, it took on a different corner of the Star Trek universe that we'd never gotten to really explore. One of the biggest things that I have been frustrated about with Star Trek as a franchise is I love my Starfleet. But I feel like Star Trek is such a wide universe that it could explore so much more beyond just Starfleet characters. So for this series to focus on characters who start off not even in Starfleet, not even knowing what Starfleet is on Tars Lamora as like prisoners of the Diviner, and have to go out into the Star Trek universe and learn about it, I think is just really cool to see a different perspective on the Star Trek universe and get to explore an area of Star Trek outside of Starfleet that I think I've been craving for a very long time. And yet it was also very smart because this is a show meant to kind of introduce kids to the very, very big world that is the Star Trek universe. I mean, kids can get into Star Trek through any episode or show, but it is sort of daunting to try and teach kids like what this universe is without like a good entry point to sort of get them through the basics, like what transporters are, what's the Federation. And I think having outsider characters learn about that along with kids was really, really smart. And yet also sort of acted as a reaffirmation for us fans of Star Trek to sort of be like, oh yeah, this is why we love these things. And I think that perspective on it was just a really smart move, and it made it Star Trek Prodigy feel fresh as a series and explore cool avenues within the Star Trek universe, while also, you know, following the mandate of like teaching kids about Star Trek. It was just a very clever idea. One of the things that I loved Prodigy also for was the fact that it brought in legacy Star Trek characters, specifically Janeway and a little bit of Chakotay, and then you also had like the outrageous Okana as well for a short amount of time, and a few other characters sprinkled here and there. But the Janeway being the big one. And what I loved most about them bringing her character in, both as the hologram initially and then the actual Janeway for later on in the season, was that she became a supporting character for our main characters' stories. One of the big problems that I see with like legacy characters coming into a project is that they tend to sort of dominate the narrative. Like even in Star Wars, where you had Luke Skywalker come in for those movies, you know, even though he was a support character for Rey, and I'm not going to get into a full discussion on Last Jedi, but like he sort of dominated like a lot of the discussion around that show because, you know, the other characters weren't allowed to take center stage as much. And even in like other Star Wars projects like Mandalorian, you have like random characters like Boba Fett, and it becomes like about those characters. That happens with any franchise. I'm not picking on Star Wars specifically. Star Trek has had it too, to a large degree. Like Star Trek Picard even is like a show that's about like, look at all these people that we can bring in, and it becomes like about like Riker showing up rather than the new characters that get brought into the series. But what Prodigy smartly does is, like, Janeway is there, but she is there to facilitate the story of our main characters. She is only there because it makes sense for her character to be there for our main characters' journeys. She's not there because they want to have Janeway there. And I'm sure that helps sell the show, and I'm sure the writers wanted to have Janeway there, of course, because they wanted to explore her. But she was there to enable them, and not the other way around. Or she wasn't she was never, like, the central character focused on. And while she has an arc and has a story, and we get to learn about her, and we get to see her dealing with stuff, especially in the latter half of the season, she is there to facilitate our main character story. And I thought that worked so well. Because with legacy characters, they tend to have main character syndrome, especially with like a captain of a show, of a previous show. And I think I just love the fact that she was a supporting player here. But it also allowed us to explore legacy Star Trek stuff that I think a lot of us Star Trek fans for a long time wanted to see. We wanted to see what happened to Chakotay. We wanted to see what happened to Janeway, what their stories were. But to see them in the background of others, I think what played to this show's very strong strengths. One thing, too, that I want to say about Prodigy is the animation of the show is freaking amazing. I was a little off-put initially by the sort of more watercolory look of the series, but as we got further into the show, especially as we got to see some of the space vistas and really beautiful planets that this animation was able to evoke, I fell in love with the animation style of the show. Took a little bit of getting used to, but it just looks so gorgeous with the amount of colors, and it was just absolutely gorgeous. So credit to the animation team for doing something unique with the animation style and really pulling it off. Beyond that, though, the other smart thing, and the thing that I hope that other Star Trek shows that tell serialized stories take notes on, I'm looking at you, Star Trek Discovery and Picard, is how to tell serialized stories while also kind of still having fun with individualized episodes. Because there is an overarching tale being told within Star Trek Prodigy, but it breaks it up into like distinct moments throughout the season and allows the story status quo to constantly change and evolve. We have the first part of the season, which is the characters on the run for the Diviner. Then they start to learn the Diviner's plan and want to get back at him and stop him from going after Starfleet. Then they learn the Nest escalating problem of like he put this thing on the ship that if they contact Starfleet, it will destroy all of Starfleet. And then they have to sort of run from Starfleet. It just constantly changes the status quo and goals of the characters each step of the season while still moving the plot forward. And it does it at specific moments. But it still allows for like there to be 2 or 3 episodes where we just get to have fun within this current status quo that we now have established for our characters. It's like, well, they're on the run for the Diviner, they're dealing with this. And because we have this specific status quo going on right now, we can have a fun story where they're like just trying to scrape by, trying to get away. Or if we have ones where they're like trying to hide the protostar, we have an episode where they're just sort of like, yeah, they have a little bit more time to relax on a planet and explore what this story is. And so I loved all of that, and I think that that was just a smart way to tell storytelling so that when we get to the finale of the show and everything has escalated to quite literally the end of the Federation itself is possibly at stake, you still feel like it's been earned. And that's my problem with other Star Trek shows like Discovery and Picard, is that when they have these finales that are like, the universe is at an end, Earth's gonna be destroyed or whatever, Starfleet's done, it doesn't feel earned because it just feels like we got there really quickly. Like the pace is always off. It doesn't feel like we've like really hit the steps to like earn this big a scale of a stakes to have this blockbuster end of the universe level. And I think that it just suffers a lot for it, especially in the end. Even seasons of Discovery that I've loved, like season 3 and season 4, I think those endings of those seasons really fall apart because they just get to a point where you just don't believe any of the tension going on because you know they're going to save the day and they haven't really earned the heightened tension that they are trying to reach for. Even in those seasons that I really like as of the show. So I think Prodigy just does that so well. And even its individual episodes are just so much fun. And I love that because it's not getting so caught up in its own need to tell its own story. And so when it does have fun episodes, like we get an episode where we meet a planet full of ensigns, like a whole culture that has like venerated Star Trek lore to the point where like doing plays about it, like Shakespeare in the Park and things like that. I think that those are just so much fun. And they just get to play around in it and not get bogged down in other nonsense, that I think it's just absolutely great for this show to have fun with. So on all those levels, I think Prodigy really, really works. I am going to quick jump to some of my criticisms of Prodigy, though, because I do think that this was not perfect. I think there were some things that did bug me, and I'm going to be very clear that these problems, at least for the most part, are a little bit nitpicky, and I am aware of that. But I think it is something that kept rubbing me the wrong way throughout the season, and there were moments where I think it went beyond nitpicks. And that is, I think there is a problem where the story sometimes tends to yada 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 things to get the plot going a little bit too easily. And for example, there was in one episode where the protostar like jumps thousands of light years away and it's on like the other side of the galaxy. And when they jump there, they just happen to run into Dahl's Ferengi adoptive parent. And we go through a whole storyline there. And the storyline itself was fine, but the fact that, like, they just sort of, like, oh, we randomly happened upon your Ferengi mother even though we just jumped millions of light years away, just very clearly told me that, like, oh, I can see the hand of the writer sort of getting this situation into place so they can tell the story. And the story's great, but they don't, like, logically get us there as well to just tell these one-off stories. And that happened a bunch of times. Like, there was an episode where we dealt with the Borg, and the Borg story was really good, but they just, like, happened upon the Borg cube. It was just like, oh, right at this exact moment that we needed it, literally they look out the window and like, oh, there's a Borg cube there. I can handle coincidences every once in a while, but there was just a lot of them over and over again. And I feel like you could fix it with just a small moment of like, oh, hologram Janeway's like, oh, you know what? A perfect thing for this would be for us to go visit a Borg cube, and then they go and find one, as opposed to it being literally right outside the window. It's just a little bit too easy for me sometimes, that I got a little bit frustrated at it. Now, those are nitpicks, because the stories themselves are great, and, you know, sometimes you just need to have the story happen, and I understand, I get it. It's Star Trek, this is not a Prodigy problem, all of Star Trek, and I'm looking at Next Generation specifically, had a big problem with this, actually, where they would sort of, like, yada yada stuff to get the story going. Voyager also, too, had a problem with that as well. It's still a problem, nonetheless. Now, as I said, to be fair, these are nitpicks, and I am certainly willing to be very forgiving of a show using shortcut storytelling methods in order to get to a really intriguing story, especially if that story is really, really good. However, this becomes a much larger problem and was certainly evident in Prodigy when these shortcut storytelling methods are used to perpetuate a storyline beyond when it would naturally have concluded or to create forced conflicts. And I've seen that numerous times within the latter half of Prodigy season. For example, the whole end half of the season hinges upon the fact that the Protostar crew cannot hail Starfleet because if they do so, it will cause Starfleet ships to start spreading a virus that will lead to the end of the Federation and Starfleet itself, which is a really cool and interesting concept. However, there are numerous times in the show where the characters have the opportunity to talk to other characters within Starfleet beyond just hailing them, like they're literally in the same room with them, and the characters just fail to do so or fail to communicate properly. This came to a head in one of the series episodes where the characters end up on this planet where they're able to talk with Janeway and several other Starfleet crew members, and we have 4 distinct separate situations where each character fails at communicating with Starfleet personnel. And while I can handle this once or twice and allow it to just be a thing that happens to keep the natural story going, the fact that the writers did this 4 times within a short period of space and then continued to do so over the next few episodes as well by having a little bit of forced was conflict before people were able to communicate with each other was really, really frustrating. It honestly got a little bit long in the tooth for me. And you could really feel a lot of the opportunities of the hand of the writer trying to force this situation to keep going beyond when it would naturally conclude. And that got really frustrating. It's the same problem as the sort of quick storytelling methods to get us into a story, but when it's used to prolong a story, it is much more frustrating. That is not to say that these stories weren't good when we did have fun episodes within them, such as the body swap episode near the end of the season where the characters were finally able to communicate with each other but had to do so through windows, which I thought was absolutely hilarious and a great way to pay off that unable to hail each other's storyline. The fact that it took so long to get there when naturally I think it would have had a much faster conclusion was the frustrating part. Where it became a little bit more frustrating for me is sometimes when they use sort of these broad strokes brushes to I think try to reach for these like big moments of catharsis and like big speak grandstanding moments that I think kind of fell flat because they're going for what Star Trek evokes, not necessarily the situation at hand. I think the one that what I'm trying to really point this out for is in the penultimate episode of the season. There is Starfleet's being attacked and destroyed, and Gwen gives a speech about the Federation and like why other people need to come and help the Federation, and it's meant to evoke the values that the series has been talking about so far, about like people coming together, Federation representing cooperation, community, solidarity, people coming together. But the way Gwen does it is she sort of says like, well, if the Federation dies, that the dream of cooperation dies with them.
Because in the infinite of space, everyone needs to know there is a place out there willing to accept us all, no matter how different we think we are. Without Starfleet, the Federation crumbles, and that dream dies with it.
And she's like asking for other communities and other civilizations to come help the Federation. And I'm like, if I heard that, I'd be kind of pissed. It's like, yeah, maybe I want to help the Federation, but like, I believe that we can cooperate even without the Federation. Fuck you, you know? And I think that those are sometimes where the show kind of paints with a broad brush to get these like big emotional moments. That doesn't feel like it feels like it's going for what Star Trek means, which I'm always here for. Don't get me wrong, I love the message, but I don't think it earns the exact way it phrases it. And I think just the little tweakings here and there could have helped those moments. And again, I understand this is nitpicks, and I understand, and I know some people say like, Jesse, this is a kid show, it's gonna go for those broad moments, and I understand that, but I still think like I've seen other kid shows that tell this without falling into those traps, and so I want to hold this show to the standard that I know these writers can do because they are so excellent. And so while I am being somewhat nitpicky here and there, I do think these are problems that do sometimes showcase themselves in larger ways throughout the series that I think, just a little bit more work on it could make them better. And again, small potato stuff, but they could escalate into bigger problems, and ones that I just hope the writers address. One other issue, and this is one that I will be honest, people may yell at me for this one, but it is one that really does bug me, and I really want to pull out, is that in the penultimate episode of the season, there is a moment where Dahl springs a kiss on Gwen, and just kisses her out of the blue. And it's meant to be taken romantically. And I will say, number one, I didn't really buy the Dahl-Gwen romance. They felt more like friends to me rather than like a romance thing. And so there's an element of like them shoving a romance storyline into a kid's show just to have it there when I don't think it's entirely earned. But that's not really my big problem. People try to force romances in stories all the time. It's, sometimes I don't like it. A lot of time I don't like it. I like it when it's more natural. And this felt a little bit forced. But the bigger problem for me is the fact that Dahl sprung a kiss on her, and that was framed as romantic and okay. And again, it's a small thing. It's a single scene. I really hate that. I'll just be honest. As someone myself who has had, when I was starting to be seen as a girl, someone went and kissed me without my permission, and thought it was romantic, thought they were being cute. It is not a cool thing to do. And it is something that is normalized a lot in all media, kids media specifically, of like the random kiss on a girl without her expecting it. And I don't think it's really okay. Because imagine if it was like a queer person who had done that, or a girl had done that to a boy. I think we'd be a lot more critical of it than a boy doing it to a girl and invading a space that way. And yeah, certainly in the narrative, Gwen was okay with it. And they do end up in a relationship or whatever. I just hate that it's a choice that the writers made. I would have much rather like Dahl just ask, like, can I kiss you, or like there be a better romantic moment between the two of them, if they wanted to go that route. But for me, like, moments like that really, really bug me because it is breaking a consent line, and it normalizes that boys should do that, especially in kids media. Again, it's not the end of the world, it's not the worst thing, but as someone who's had that happen to me, and how we sort of normalize boys invading girls' consent spaces because they feel like it's okay, even in casual ways like that. I think it's something that shouldn't be put in any show, but Star Trek specifically, I think that's kind of rough in this day and age. So yeah, that was one, again, small thing, single scene in the show. We'll move past it, but it was one that really did bug me upon watching it happen in the show. And I kind of articulated in my individual review of the episode, but I didn't really do so for I wasn't able to articulate it as well, but it stuck with me since that review, and I wanted to make it clear that was a big issue for me. I'll let it go, though. Beyond that, though, to really wrap out my thoughts on this series, though, this was truly a phenomenal work by the Star Trek Prodigy team. Even moving beyond some stuff, I loved the lore of the show. I think some of the themes and ideas and politics of this were really, really smart on a really great level. Like, I was talking earlier about how Prodigy was sort of evoking Star Trek as a theme throughout the series, and broad strokes of community, solidarity, and bringing people together, and how the Federation is all about cooperation and working through diversity and difference, working with diversity and difference. And not only was that smartly evoked within the themes of Starfleet, but they did that in opposite with things like the Diviner storyline, like where we meet all of our characters on Tars Lamora. They can't speak to each other. They aren't allowed to talk to each other. They literally don't even speak the same language. They don't have universal communicators, so the Diviner keeps them separated. And not only is that a smart idea, it is a very political one too. If you look at a lot of political movements that have authoritarian and totalitarian regimes, they do try to keep people separated by not allowing them to talk to each other, communicate with each other. Literally don't have them able to speak the same language. And so that was a tactic to sort of separate people out. And so I think doing it in that way was just so smart to add that political element into Star Trek Prodigy, and then contrasting it with the Federation as a place that values diversity and difference and makes us stronger through it, and then having a bunch of eclectic characters from different backgrounds and different species, I think was a really cool way to evoke that and make it very presciently political, while also really evoking what Star Trek is always about. I think really, really smart. I think that there's just the subtle politics and ideas and concepts displayed throughout the series on that level, I think were just really, really excellently done. So I think in so many different ways, I think Star Trek Prodigy is a truly special show. And while I have some critiques, I understand they are much more nitpicky than most other of my Star Trek shows, where I have much more structural issues. Again, as much as I love Star Trek Discovery and have major issues with the Star Trek Picard, I have much larger structural concerns with those shows, whereas Prodigy, a lot of my stuff is tweak this, tweak this, tweak this. I have an issue with this specific thing. But there's nothing about this show on a whole level that I think it is off base. And I think it is truly fantastic. Another thing too, I should also mention, I just could rant about the show for forever, is just how cool some of the concepts they play with, some of the time travel stuff and that they do in this show. The different time zone looping episode was so smart. The time travel stuff with Chakotay and the Diviner's backstory was also really cool. I thought was just fun, just Star Trek time travel wankery that I always love seeing. And yeah, I could probably nitpick the crap out of that, but Star Trek has always just been weird with time travel and nonsense like that. So I probably could nitpick it, but on the whole, I thought it was just a lot of fun, and I love the going for the home run with a lot of their cool concepts that they play with, and still making it feel emotional. So on that level, Prodigy was just great too. Yeah, this show was just special. It was really special. So if you have not checked out Star Trek Prodigy, you really should. It is a really wonderful and amazing show that I have some issues with, but I really I'm very confident that the writers will be able to continue the success and even improve upon themselves into season 2, because this was really wonderful. So Star Trek Prodigy, those are my thoughts on this season of the show. What did you think about it, though? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Star Trek Prodigy, we're looking for season 2, but next up will be Star Trek Picard season 3, and we'll see for that show's final season if they can actually manage to pull it together to give us a good season of Star Trek Picard. Hopefully, fingers crossed. So next Star Trek thing on the board is that, so be on the lookout for that. I also have other reviews and things that are coming on this channel, like The Last of Us, and I'm also doing some more fun comedy stuff on this channel as well. Don't forget to check out my main channel, Jessie Gender. I have a Patreon they support me at. I'm on Twitter as that ship goes down and dies. But beyond all that, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.